Hello listeners everywhere. Welcome to the archive of audio antiquities, a voyage into the vault of wonders on the wireless. In a moment, Simon Exton and Ken Moss will be here to speak to you.
Hello and welcome back to the archive of audio antiquities. I'm Ken Moss.
I'm Simon Exton.
And this time we are listening to the 2021 BBC radio adaptation of Douglas Adams' Starship Titanic.
The intriguing and altogether bizarre story of the Starship Titanic began, not as many believed, at the launch ceremony on the planet Blerontin prior to the incident with which the ship became synonymous. It began on a somewhat inconsequential planet, which lesser publications have dismissed as mostly harmless. We at the Encyclopedia Galactica, whose field journalists spent years investigating the diverse cultural and geopolitical makeup of the planet, have instead declared it generally harmless. And of the 7.8 billion dominant life forms currently inhabiting this blue-green planet, it was one known as
Nettie,
who was to utter 6 startlingly prophetic words.
Things don't just disappear, do they?
This was broadcast on Sunday the 19th of December 2021 at 3 o'clock on BBC Radio 4. It's an hour-long drama and it was written by Terry Jones and Ian Billing. Directed by Dirk Maggs, who has done the last 4 Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series on radio. This starred Michael Palin, Simon Jones and, a handful of others, with music by Philip Pope. And the précis is as follows. Far off in the centre of one of the less well-charted quadrants of the universe, a vast civilization is preparing to launch the most technologically advanced starship ever, Starship Titanic. While the galaxy's media looks on, it unfortunately goes a spontaneous massive existence failure and disappears. Leah Venus, the designer of the ship, uncovers shoddy workmanship, poor cybernetics, and a series of increasingly eccentric robots. The owners, Scraleontis and Brabostigan, were intent on destroying the ship and claiming the insurance. Meanwhile, in Oxfordshire, 4 humans are inspecting a property they intend buying, only to see it crushed under the rematerialising starship. This disaster is swiftly followed by an invitation from an over-attentive robot to come aboard, and Lucy, Dan and Nettie are catapulted into a series of increasingly bizarre encounters. Right, well, it's a description. I really wanted to like this. I'm a huge fan of the Hitchhiker series. I think the radio adaptations, certainly Dirk Maggs has got hold of it and tried to assemble some sort of continuity with the Hitchhiker's universe, which wasn't even present in the books. And he did a bloody good job. His company, Perfectly Normal Productions, their sound design, their production techniques are excellent, and they've really got hold of the Douglas Adams vibe. So this came along. I must admit, I wasn't expecting it at all. It just popped up on BBC Radio iPlayer because I was downloading things and spotted it. However, did you enjoy this, Dr. Exton?
Not particularly. I didn't hate it. I just found it a bit pointless. You go into it knowing that it is a Douglas Adams inspired, initiated, or whatever. It is very substandard Douglas Adams. It kind of reminded me of some of the Doctor Who Virgin New Adventures, where you had fairly awful writers who thought they were the new Douglas Adams and clearly weren't. There's nothing original in here. It's not anywhere near as entertaining as a single thing that Douglas Adams has written. It is constantly referential to Hitchhiker's Guide in terms of Encyclopedia Galactica and an inferior book that they never actually mention as the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but there's the whole mostly harmless thing. To be honest, that bit reminded me of how much I hated Paul Mars's novels that basically slag off Doctor Who and say, I could do so much of a better job, and then don't. I was pretty bored by this right the way through.
I'm really sorry to agree with you there. I really wanted to love this. Because we're now getting to the stage where they've run out of pure Douglas Adams stuff to adapt. I think the only thing left is the Salmon of Doubt, which was going to be the third Dirk Gently novel, and it was never finished. It was only really a collection of random chapters, which I know Dirk Maggs, it's even in the sleeve notes of Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul. In those sleeve notes, it says that Salmon of Doubt's coming the year after. It never arrived, it just got cancelled. That at some point is going to get made, because they're clinging on now. This is an adaptation, actually, of the computer game that Douglas Adams wrote. He wanted to write a sort of open universe thing, and Starship Titanic was the result. There is an interview with him somewhere, which is on a CD called Douglas Adams at the BBC, where he goes into great depth about Starship Titanic.
Douglas has been developing the Starship Titanic CD-ROM game for quite a while with his company. And he'd shown me various bits of it as it developed. And then he asked me if I'd go along and do the voice of the parrot. And Douglas said to me, Terry, you've always been playing parrots. That's all you've ever played. And I thought, spam, spam, spam. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. It's quite obvious. I'd always been playing parrots, and I'd never realised it. It took Douglas to point this out to me.
Something like 10,000 lines of dialogue in this, sort of 16 hours of pre-recorded dialogue. So there was a small team of us who worked on that. The final collaboration actually is with the player himself or herself, because with a CD-ROM, it just sits there until somebody starts to interact with it.
I have no time for freeloaders.
She'll just carry on being offensive to her as long as you like. You know, I can say things like, screw you.
I don't wish to be rude. Well, in fact, I do. So, pig's bladder to you.
She's just an exercise in rudeness, really. She's actually inspired by an airline check-in clerk that Douglas met once, and she's just sort of blossomed from that, really.
Experienced PC gamers who've tried Titanic out say they're frustrated by the slow navigation through the lush graphics of Art Deco interiors and the lack of a decent plot. They found the conversations aimless, lacking in proper rewards, and the characters irritating after a while. But Starship Titanic will doubtless appeal to the legions of Douglas Adams fans in Britain, America, and inhabiting cult sites on the internet, which Adams next hopes to chart properly with a version of his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
It's a huge task, and it's beyond the resources we have at the moment. But it's something, that's very much on our sights.
I suppose you do see similarities between exploring the galaxy and exploring the internet.
I guess. They're both vast wildernesses.
It really should hang together better than this, because it's written by Terry Jones, and they were all contemporaries of each other. They all worked together. Michael Palin does a passable job as the Encyclopedia Galactica, but it's not really that. If Michael Palin 20 or 30 years ago had been doing it, there might have been a little more bounce in his voice, but he's got that weathered, older Michael Palin voice now, and it's a little bit serious and more staid than his Monty Python days. So I can see why they've gone for him, but it doesn't really come off. You don't really care about any of the characters, because they're all a bit two-dimensional. Although it says in the synopsis that it's all about claiming the insurance, it's never really that clear, even when it's explained who's trying to pull what. I mean, that might be the fact that my concentration was wandering off massively all the way through this. Like I've always said before, if I reach for my phone or Wikipedia while I'm listening to something, there's a problem. And for something that's only an hour long, produced by Dirk Maggs, who is a very, very competent audio producer. It sounds great, as they always do. The story itself, whenever they adapt computer and video games into stories, they're great to play. They don't necessarily translate onto screen or into other media.
Because the way a computer game works is that you, by definition, have to have a linear plot, because you are the main character in it and you pick everything up as you're going along. Whereas an actual plot, whether it's in a book, a TV program, in an audio drama, it's very dull if you don't have multiple strands of plot going through.
Actually, yeah, that's a very pertinent way of looking at it. That is true. And they've definitely tried to recapture that Hitchhiker's vibe. And considering Starship Titanic is actually referenced in the Hitchhiker's novels, it should tie in closely than it does. But because they've got the whole Encyclopedia Galactica thing, and it's written in such a way as to be a little bit snooty and derogatory about The Hitchhiker's Guide, it does feel like that sort of new adventures, we're doing this so much better than you. Even though that's clearly not the intention here, that's unfortunately the vibe that's coming off this. That it's within the Hitchhiker's universe, but it's so much better than that. And what actually comes across there is undergraduate college humour. I'd really love to be more gushing about this, but the plot is, I won't say wafer thin, but the thrust of the game was to get this crystal back into Starship Titanic's computer and revitalise the thing. So everything on the way to that is a bit of a set piece rather than driving the story forward. And to be honest, I can't remember much about it, and I only listened to this last week.
Well, I finished listening to this about 2 hours ago for the third time, and I still find the characters interchangeable. I was quite tickled about the fact that there's one that's called Yartek.
Oh, now, that rang a bell for me, but I can't remember why.
Yartek, leader of the alien Vord from Keys of Marinus.
That was the one, yes. They have got Simon Jones back. Simon Jones plays Scraleontis in this. Oh, to be fair, I didn't spot him, and I was listening. But because I didn't have the cast list in front of me, I didn't pick up that that's who it was. I actually thought it was going to end up being some Arthur Dent cameo in a very sort of clever and contrived way, and it wasn't.
I mean, I assume that they didn't have the rights to use any of the Hitchhiker's Guide characters.
It's very possible. To be honest, I can't see that being a major issue for Dirk Maggs, because he's so well connected with the estate, and if you're going to do something, because it's all tied up with Douglas Adams, it's one fits all, really. So that probably didn't really come into it, but largely because none of the Hitchhiker's characters featured in any way in Starship Titanic, and the references in Hitchhiker's Guide are all Hitchhiker's Guide entries and side plots. They're nothing to do with the main characters. So there's not really any character crossover, or to be honest, room for it. Any Hitchhiker's characters would have been massively contrived, although I think if Zaphod had turned up or something, it would have massively lifted this.
Yeah, because Hitchhikers is brilliant on so many levels. And one of the levels is the characters, and even the character of Arthur Dent, who is written to be dull, is an incredibly engaging character.
Oh, yes.
Because he's very well written to be dull. All of these characters, they're basically interchangeable. And it actually took me until the second listen through to realise that there are actually two women from Earth lifted up onto the Starship Titanic in the elevator thing.
Yeah, the group of humans, they're dull. I don't know why there's that many. You could have easily conflated all of those characters into one or two, frankly. Again, probably would have been better for it.
And the massive Deus Ex Machina with, oh, well, yes, we've got somebody going into a black hole so that they can live for 1,000 years and build up on-ship credits so that they can then upgrade everybody to first class. Douglas Adams did do that level of Deus Ex Machina, but he didn't do it seriously. He did it with a massive tongue in his cheek, and it's, oh, yeah, isn't this funny? It's the sofa of reasonable comfort. Thinking about that, it's the difference between the sofa of reasonable comfort in Curse of the Fatal Death, which is done as a joke, and the resolution of Spyfall at the beginning of part 2, where it's just, we can't think of another way out of it. So future Doctor is going to give you all the ways to take over the plane and get over this. And it worked brilliantly in the Curse of the Fatal Death, and it worked unbelievably badly in Spyfall. I loved Spyfall Part 1. I thought it was an absolute change of pace. And then you get to the resolution in Part 2 and you think there is zero imagination or thought gone into this. It's just, we need something to resolve the plot. And I can't be bothered to think of anything more clever than future Doctor sorts it out for us. And that's kind of how a lot of Starship Titanic came across, and particularly that bit of, we'll send one character into the black hole and she comes back and 1,000,000 years old or whatever, and then she goes to the Starship Titanic spa and ends up being youthful and vibrant again.
Yeah, I've never been particularly fond of, in a single bound, he was free resolutions, and yeah, anything Deus Ex does take you out of it, and it does cheapen the whole story. So yeah, I'm entirely with you on that.
I don't agree that anything Deus Ex cheapens the whole story, because Douglas Adams was always doing it, but he did it with a degree of deprecation. He did it with a massive chunk of humour.
Oh, well, yeah, but that was Douglas Adams. I mean, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it was all tongue-in-cheek. I mean, if you went through that and took it seriously,
you get
nothing.
Point.
Yeah, you get nothing out of it. So that I can forgive. That's not... I know it's a terrible comparison because this is supposed to be tongue-in-cheek. It's just not done with that elan and that panache. It's just not there. I really wanted to like this.
I agree with you on that. And my whole point about the Deus Ex Machina is that Douglas Adams knew how to do it well and knew how to do it with a sense of humour, tongue-in-cheek. And yes, I know I'm taking the piss to get away with this, but the rest of what I'm writing is so good that, you know what, kind of doesn't matter.
Should we rate this in earworms?
This is the song that never ends. Yes, it goes on and on, my friends.
What do you think?
It wasn't terrible, it was just dull. And when you're going into the Hitchhiker's universe, you're not expecting dull, particularly when it's Douglas Adams' source material. It's largely written by Terry Jones. You've got some fairly impressive people there. Dirk Maggs producing, Philip Pope music. I've got all the time in the world for Philip Pope. Michael Palin as the Encyclopedia Galactica. It should work, and yet it doesn't. And I won't be racing back to it, and I'm going to give it 5 out of 10. It's well produced, but story-wise, no. It's just not gripped me at all, really. But because of what they've attempted to do, yeah, I'll give it 5.
Okay. It bored the arse off me. I don't think there was anything original in it. Yes, they had some great names in it who really weren't used to their best advantage. The writing was terrible and derivative. 3.
Yeah, I can fully appreciate why you've said that. Yeah. You realise you put that on the same level as Daughter of the Gods.
I enjoyed it about as much. Actually, I think I possibly enjoyed Daughter of the Gods a little bit more, so maybe I should drop it down.
Final answer?
3.
It's going to be a 3. Good grief. So long and thanks for all the fish.
And they even made sort of tee references to that, so long and thanks for all the fish paste, didn't they?
Yeah, the more you analyse this, the worse it gets, doesn't it?
And they'll continue singing it forever just because.
What have you got for us in terms of other listening this time? What's our podcast of the week?
Bearing in mind we've just listened to an hour of massive Deus Ex Machina, I'm going to suggest listening to a literal Deus Ex Machina, and I'm going to suggest The God Pod.
I am not remotely familiar. What's this one about?
It's absolutely hilarious. It is exactly what it says. It is the Lord God Almighty with a podcast, with conversations with Satan and the Holy Ghost and Jesus and Mary Magdalene and Psyche, who comes in as God's therapist. It is absolutely hilarious. Incredibly irreverent. Any of you that have any lingering vestige of Christianity, don't listen to this. But anybody who sees organized religion for the towering pile of controlling bullshit that it is, oh my God, it's funny. It is so funny.
Well, that sounds very, very much up my street then. I shall give it a whirl. The God Pod.
It's one where to really get the most out of it, you have to be a Patreon, because a lot of the episodes are, you get the first 3 minutes and then it's go over to Patreon. But there's enough where you can get full episodes. You'll get a good idea of what it's like. It is absolutely hilarious.
And on that note, everybody, we're going to sign off. Next time, we're going to be back listening to the big Finnish Doctor Who story, The Lovecraft Invasion.
Oh, God.
Until then, thank you for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it. We shall be back soon.
Bye now.
The archive of audio antiquities featured Simon Exton and Ken Moss, and the announcer was Jenny at Blue Box 99. All featured soundtracks are the property of their respective producers and no infringement of copyright is intended. Title music was by Edward White and the programme was produced by Maverick Productions. For more information, please visit maverickproductionsuk.blogspot.com or find us on social media.